Saifuddin Arwani, a Persian poet, once said on the eve of the Mongol invasion of our lands, در مملکت چو غرش شیران گذشت و رفت، این عوعوی سگان شما نیز بگذرد. When the roaring voice of the lions has passed through the land, the howling of the jackals too shall pass. Good afternoon. I welcome you all for our today's conference, Afghanistan 5 years under Taliban rule. I believe today we have not come together as professional, academics, or activists, but as the witnesses of a painful chapter of Afghanistan history. A chapter which continues with the suffering of our nation inside Afghanistan, the diaspora, the silence of global friends of Afghanistan, but at the same time, an extraordinary resilience and resistance of Afghanistan people, the diaspora, and the individual global friends of Afghanistan. That's why I express my grateful appreciation for all the organizers and all of you who made this gathering happen. I'm sure that your presence here is not just a token of attendance. It is your commitment and also an act of solidarity with Afghanistan and our nation, so that we have to remember that we are not confronting a political event, or we are not confronting a topic about a historical event. We are talking about 5 years of suffering which continues and now. And we talk about different sectors of the nation, from women, girls, youth, minority, intellectuals, elites, and anyone who is inside Afghanistan and they are suppressed. We get to know that every girl inside Afghanistan, while waking in the morning, that they know there is no handbook for going to school, which is very foundation rights of the girl. A woman knows enshrined within the four walls of the home, going not anywhere. The youths, except the darkness, they do not see any source of hope for the future and prosperous life. And like that, all other sections of the society. So I believe when we talk today here, we just share a brief part of 5 years suffering, and also to advocate the resistance and the resilience of the diaspora and the people of Afghanistan, how, despite the silence of the global community, they are standing for not to be forgotten, and also for Afghanistan to uprise and make the country a prosperous, democratic once again. Thank you so much for all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Gauti, for your grounding insights. We now transition to our first panel session, which shifts our gaze to geopolitical, security, and economic realities. Our experts will unpack how regional powers navigate the regimes, the evolving security landscape, and the path forward for recognition, engagement, and humanitarian relief. Please welcome our moderator, Dr. Amit Tarti, and our esteemed panelists. Dr. Amit Tarti is the Director of Media Studies at the Marine Corps University in Virginia. Before that, He was with Radio Free Europe or Radio Azali as a regional analyst focusing on Afghanistan and Pakistan. And also, he was a researcher and analyst on Iranian affairs and the Emarat Center for Strategic Studies. And our panelists are Dr. Umar Saf and Dr. Vilo Fersaki, Ambassador Andoni, and Mr. Nushab Beghi.
I welcome all of you. I know the occasion is somber, but the fact that we have all gathered here shows that there is interest to learn and hopefully see a better future with that crisis. It's an honor and privilege for me to moderate a panel of two people that I know. To my left, Ambassador I just met. Thank you, sir, to you and yourself. And I will not use a lot of the time on reading all of their bios, just to briefly, you have those in the invite. Just briefly, I will go, each panelist will have 7 minutes. Those of you who have seen me in this panel, I am very strict. I am a Marine, so I stick with time. So at 5 minutes, I'll give them a hands up and please, so we can have a robust question and answer period. After 7 minutes with each of the panelists, as the names are on the program, we will stop and we'll have 15 minutes of question and answer. We'll begin with Dr. Saleh Wilson. But you're just briefly to tell you, he is a fellow at Princeton University's Afghanistan Policy Lab and teaches political science at the American University in Afghanistan. And I would say that this teaching to students in Afghanistan online is one of the greatest things we can do. I am a byproduct of another howlings of jackals in Afghanistan in the 1970s, which I came here. I've been living in the United States now for over 50 years to serve my country. And the only reason I'm here and I do what is because of my teachers. So, thank you for what you're doing. Panel is yours, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. The daily pleasure share with the Sikh colleagues and share a couple of words on what's going on happening. So, with all of you. I think a very prominent question that once we talk about Afghanistan and its thought on years is what are the Taliban as a roots, as a regime, as a form of the world. So what I will try to do briefly in a couple of minutes is to lay out a conceptual framework to make it a bit easier for us to understand what is the notion of Taliban's forms of state or governance. To simply, I will suggest that the Taliban has constituted a form of revolutionary, religious, authoritarian regime. So there are three key terms here. It is revolutionary in the sense that it is born out of a prolonged armed conflict governed by the elite who are bound together by a shared ideology and experience of combat together. And it's authoritarian because it has regulated almost everything from the simple and liberal life to society to speech and political activity. And finally, it is religious in the sense that it drives its legitimacy and it's full of from the religion. And of course, one might say, okay, there are different other forms of states also to have root through the same pattern, being religious and being authoritarian. And that could be, for example, Iran since 1979, but the raised difference is that Iran's revolutionary regime was governed by Islamists alongside a political framework would allow certain forms of political participation, such as elections, but that does not exist under the Taliban. Or for instance, also the alternative, another alternative could be Sudan under the National Islamic Front, which pursued a kind of comparable Islamization projects, but the scale and scope of Islamization and authoritarianism under the Taliban is not comparable to what Sudan did. And finally, Saudi Arabia was also at some point following the same kind of pattern, ruled by clerics or the Wahhabis. But at the same time, what makes the Taliban quite different from this Saudi is that in Taliban regime, the clerics are not just an independent group, but they are the ones who conduct policies, prescribe policies, and enforce those policies. And that's point number one. And the second key issue that I will probably conclude with is that the pattern of power which is exercised. And there are two distinct forms of power that Taliban exercise. One is, of course, sovereign power, in terms of Foucauldian term, sovereign power, the brutal use of force, naked use of force through regulation. So all aspects of society is accumulated, and that is extreme to the extent that one can say it has created a kind of bare law. With bare law is a sociology of a concept by a philosopher called Bergambé. Bare law means an individual who is stripped of all sorts of rights. It is just converted into the living ye. So it comes from a Greek term converting from bios, an individual who is entitled to rights, to zoo. Zoo is someone who doesn't have any rights, it just appears at the door. So that is the sovereign aspect of the power. The more important other aspect of power the Taliban exercise is kind of disciplinary power. And again, by disciplinary power, I mean the form of power which is not visible, and it trains individuals to regulate themselves. It basically creates different forms of subjectivities. For instance, the form of madrasas that they are created, or the Ministry of Kiri, what's called prohibition of virtues and prevention of vice. It creates certain forms of regulations wherein they don't have to, a Taliban police officer no more has to conduct your behavior. You will be trained as an individual to live in a society to behave yourself. For example, eventually you will get up and you have to keep here, adopt the dress code, do not allow your women to go out, or women are scared to go out even if they do not want to be restricted in the private state. So it creates certain form of subjectivity which is somehow closer to the Taliban model of an individual which will be actually characterized as a Deobandi, very conservative, radical individual. And I think that is a very, very dangerous aspect of it. When you have a society which is totally obedient, and they don't have any agency at the end of the day to resist. But I will come also probably later stage. I will be interested to talk about patterns and forms of resistance, how society reacts to this two different forms of power, the sovereign power and superior power also.
Thank you so much. Our second speaker is Dr. Niloufar Saqi. She is a scholar of security and peace, specialized in regional security, transnational security, human security, and peacemaking. She teaches at the associate research professor at the Elias School here close by in George Washington University, and she is the founder and directs the Adhyana Foundation. Dr. Saqi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Kazi, and thank you to our organizer for having me here today. 7 minutes is extremely fine, but I try to just 6. Yeah, if you would be. I try to be just for other context. I was asked to talk about security dynamics in Afghanistan, the region, and how is what's the narrative actually. So, just to give you a little bit of background of the security dynamics and what it means for Afghanistan and the region, Taliban, 5 years of rule. And that forced a question, Hamza, I'm happy to answer. But I would like to just to kick off about the notion of improved security, which many of the researchers and some of the advocates of the top KBA here in Washington, D.C. and around the world. And that is not correct. That is not a wise kind of a narrative to put forward for the condition of Usam. Let me just also emphasize that we turned the Taliban 5 years back. The concept of fear happened in Afghanistan, and the fear is a very strong indicator of insecurity. The fear that people started having by the return of the Taliban, let alone created a kind of insecurity in Afghanistan. The perception of threat in the region by all the neighboring states, that's another indicator of insecurity, which by the return of the Taliban and from last 5 years, at the neighboring states of Afghanistan and the region, they all have that perception of threat. Why this all perceptions and why this whole concept of fear. Because the background of the Taliban are, the background you all know, I don't want to go into depth, but Taliban, they are militant organization. They were militant organization. The background of Taliban as a strong hardliner ideologist, as an autocratic system that they had during the shadow governments in 2023 and 4 that they were, in 2002 and 3 that they had to do other parts of Afghanistan. And overall, they were the main players in conducting attacks in Afghanistan for 20 years. So I think that's setting up. And that background gave an image to a group. What kind of group is a pulp? So it's a group, but all these characteristics which created fear and which created perception of threat in the region that still exists. That hasn't changed. That situation exists. Now, coming to the whole concept, the narrative of improved security. There is no improved security. The folks who were conducting attacks, they are powerful. The tactic has had changed. They were suicide bomb, they were attacks happening, but now there is another tactic to reinforce their power in society. The same group that is also created kind of discipline. So the security hasn't improved. It evolved. Insecurity is happening on. Extrajudicial killing, detention, torture, punishment, killing of different kinds, and make anything. Forget about suppression of human rights, freedom of speech. All those stuff are also kinds of insecurity that Taliban have created from last 5 years. So in addition to that, or other kinds, torture, punishment, detention, extrajudicial killing, there's another form of insecurity which is called suppressing the society, as Dr. Sai mentioned. This is a visual of totalitarian system, to suppress the society and make the society obedient to you. So that is what Taliban have done. And that's a kind of insecurity. So there's no notion of improved security at all. There is a notion of evolved insecurity that we have to assess that. Coming to region and coming to the hard security address, the RICD strengthened after the Taliban takeover. We have TTP conducting more than 200 attacks through 2024, if I'm not wrong, and 3 in Pakistan. So a warning. And we have also seen Taliban to cite Al-Qaeda sit during also that. So this is the hard security evidence that is there, that hasn't disappeared, because Taliban will never close their eyes or end their ties with the counter-show unit testing. That's their power. That's the leverage. They can stay in power to sustain the power. So the high is there, but they are quiet because they want to use that leverage as a power. The connectivity, the connection with the third group. So that still is there. Therefore, the perception of threat exists in the region. The fear exists in Afghanistan, and that is all indicators in security, which is unfortunately exists. And then you also end up with that tomorrow is the 15th of August, 5 years back. It's a dark day for Afghanistan. It's a tragedy for the government of Afghanistan, for the government of the world. Their word and it goes are defined with the basic human rights. And still, I'm 5 years of the Taliban rule. We haven't seen any changes in that. So the world should reintervention to Afghanistan, both because of security elements and madrasization, everything that Dr. Saab mentioned, of course, and many more hard security threats releases, and also other insecurities can show this question of illegality.
Fantastic, thank you. Our third speaker, we are going very fast, which is great because we have a lot of ideas that are being put forward. That my hope is, I have a lot of questions here, but my hope is that I don't have to even pose one and that you do that. So you'll get more time. Please think about those as we go. Our third speaker is His Excellency Ambassador Anthony Wade. He is currently the co-chair of Mexico program for the Inter-American Dialogue. He is a career U.S. diplomat. His last posting was post of ambassador to our wonderful southern neighbor, the United States of Mexico. But for us who are here, his presence is because he was in Afghanistan at a crucial time. He served both as coordinating director for development and economic affairs and a deputy ambassador in Kabul from 2009 to 2011. And welcome, sir. All is yours.
Thanks everybody for having us here. I have continued to follow Afghanistan, and that an Afghan-American colleague and I have had a regular dialogues with all the former ambassadors and deputy ambassadors of the United States and others, depending on the topic, to talk about what's been happening in Afghanistan, especially in recent years. Well, we actually started before the transition when the U.S. left, and have continued that. And I think to say one of the things that I've seen happening as we go forward is we have become somewhat depressed by the tenor of events, and that we of course hoped that we'd see an evolution in Afghanistan, that there would be a stronger regime that would survive and continued on, even if having some interaction with the Taliban. That didn't happen. The Taliban took over and really did not have a view of having much space whatsoever for politicians and people of note from the previous period of time. And so we have maintained contact with a number of people, Afghans who have left the country, Afghans who are still active Philippines. You know, they're spread all over the world, not just in the United States. And it's largely been, I'll be honest, a sad process, in the sense that there are not well-organized, united groups looking at ways to deal with this. There are certainly certain people who are very united in wanting to change things, but they're often divided from each other. And that's been one of the challenges going forward. The Taliban, from our perspective, seems to have adopted a position of keeping others divided at bay, asserting their own power. But as was mentioned earlier, not really with a vision for the future that sees a modern Afghanistan evolving in any way. So we have continued dialogues. We've tried to maintain touch with a number of the political activists who stay engaged in different parts of the world. But it's been a very difficult time, because we know the promise that Afghanistan had, and we don't see much of that promise still evolving and still coming forward, though there are many, many Afghans in the United States, but in other countries who would like to see that change come about. I guess I would say that right now we're really in period very low U.S. influence in the country, and not much interest in becoming more involved in things that are touching on Afghanistan, except to the degree that the Taliban regime is willing to work against certain more radical groups. There are more radical groups there. We're trying to carry out violent events in other parts of the world. And as we know, there are a number of them who are living there who are forbidden by the Taliban from doing that widely. And there is a dialogue about that. And there is a problem between Pakistan and Afghanistan, where we do remain involved. And there is a dialogue going on between the United States and Pakistan, talking about that. Not that we have a unified strategy, we do have a dialogue looking forward. I think, as you know, this administration has not had a strong interest in developing a stronger relationship in any way with the Taliban. It's interested in having dialogue with them, in stopping violence that may affect Americans. But there's not been a great deal of interest whatsoever in having that dialogue develop. In fact, it's down to a very low level these days, as we look at. So I think there's still an interest in the United States. There are still many thousands of Americans who have an interest in working on Afghanistan. As you know, most of the discussion right now is what to do with Afghans who have left the country or either in the United States in a questionable position, or who are, some of them are still, as you know, in the Persian Gulf or in other places looking to come to the U.S. And so there's an active group of Afghans and Americans working together, trying to take that dialogue forward and to find ways to deal with that. But I think it's a very large question about what the United States is going to be the Afghanistan going forward whatsoever. We'll see, I think you'll see some actions in Congress and others of people trying to bring attention to some of the worst things that the Taliban government is doing. But you'll also see this administration interested in maintaining a quiet dialogue with the Taliban about the critique of terrorism, the terrorist activities that might be stopped or not take place. And the Taliban and the United States share a view of certain groups and have acted in similar ways with certain groups. Certainly not all groups that carry out violent activities. So what we found from a private sector, from former ambassadors and others getting together to talk about this, is there isn't much to talk about, but very honestly, not a lot of hope of anything of much constructive that is going to come these days. Part of it is just reminding people of the ties that the United States does still have to Afghanistan. So many Afghans that we owe a great deal to. And I think we have to look for ways to develop those ties and to have that inform our policy going forward, even if not the policy that we will see in the immediate months ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Last but certainly not least, our speaker is Mr. Mushtaq Rahim. I would call him an ABE. He's all but dissertation, I hope, in completing his doctorate in international affairs at Johns Hopkins University in Maryland. He is an Afghan development practitioner, researcher, and policy expert, has 2 decades of experience, and has also served as Deputy Minister in Afghanistan's High Peace Council. Hopefully, with your dissertation and your background, you help bring peace in that country. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. For my talk will be very much concentrated on the situation of humanitarian situation and development that is taking place in Afghanistan. And I mean, the place that I begin is that Afghanistan is the second worst humanitarian crisis right now in the world after Sudan. A sheer number of people who are exposed to the humanitarian crisis. 22 million of Afghans are in immediate need of humanitarian assistance. And when we talk about the development situation, if we begin with the pure economist point of view, look at the numbers, the GDP growth plummeted to by 27% by the end of 2022. And since then, the recovery has moved in at 6%. So from the baseline of 2022, before the collapse of the Republic, is still 19% below that baseline. And let's not forget the fact that 2022 was a time when we were marred by COVID-19 and ongoing significant virus that I've sadly talked about. So the situation from the perspective of development, of course, we are regressed in terms of economic development, the sheer hard numbers. The humanitarian situation has further deteriorated because the donor funding was pulled out of Afghanistan immediately after the collapse of the Republic. 38% of Afghanistan's GDP was made out of the humanitarian and development assistance that came out of the donor countries, aid provided the OECD countries. And that is stopped, and that has come down only to 11%. Now, you will find many people telling you that, well, the economy has survived, it didn't collapse. We have Afghanistan stabilized even from the time when the Republic was operating. But those numbers are pretty much misleading in a sense that, we have 13 million of people who are facing acute hunger. By the standard of WFP right now, we have 38% people who in case who don't get support, the food assistance. It will start with that. We have numbers in excess of 38 to 39% in that situation. So the pretty grim situation, and then there is no development assistance coming. But in the meantime, the regional trade has significantly dropped down because of of course, first of all, the closure of the border with the Pakistanis. The only source of income for the Afghans, not only the main source of income was agricultural products that we sent across, and that did not happen this year since October. And then the Middle East, the situation in the Middle East between Iran and the US, the only other possibility of getting trade through Chabahar and Iran has stopped. So in that kind of situation, and another thing that happened that the Taliban takes significant credit for was that they announced a ban on poppy cultivation in Afghanistan. 95% of the poppy cultivation has stopped. It has come down to 5% of cultivation from the time of the Republic. But then don't forget, 92% of income source have been, people have been deprived of 92% of their income source without getting an alternative to the people. So without an alternative, that means the people are suffering. And then let's not forget that Afghanistan is the sixth, the most at risk of climate change hazards that are being created, that Afghans are facing. And that again is impacting the lives of the people. And I can tell you that the staggering situation that some of the pockets of the country face due to the ongoing humanitarian crisis, and that is called phase 4 of the integrated food security phase that WFP has a standard, where people are faced with famine, that is called phase 4. And we have places like Badghis, Ohor, Faryab, Paktika, some parts of the greater Kandahar region, the people, if they are not helped, they will starve to death. So in that kind of situation, I think overall we're struggling. Another thing that has happened over the last 5 years, in the past, of course, the Taliban did not inherit an economy that was self-sustaining, that was survival, of course. But then another aspect that has deteriorated is that we had up to 350,000 forces that were getting salaries, and that had a trickle-down effect on the local communities. The money was spilling out into the local communities. That's not going. And the huge gap that's been created is a situation that Afghanistan is a real crisis. I earlier mentioned about the stabilization of Afghani and the economy, but that is mainly because we had $3.8 billion invested in humanitarian assistance in 2022 in Afghanistan. But that's significantly gone down over the last 4 years by 70%. We had only $1.2 billion last year compared to the 2022 where we had $3.8 billion, but of course due to the US restrictions of funding to Afghanistan. And the effect of that 3.8 billion plus that took place between 2022 and 2024 remains to somehow help the people survive the current crisis. But over the next couple of years, if things do not get normalized, the economy just doesn't get going, we are heading into extreme crisis. And I'll finish with one point that some of the places that are expected to suffer less are suffering the most. The provinces like Helmand, Kandahar, Uruzgan, Farah, and Nimroz, the center of gravity, center of power for the Taliban, are getting the worst effect or hit just because of the policies, because the Taliban do not allow any sort of assistance to women, any assistance title to women, because I have been working in Afghanistan for the last 5 years. They don't allow the implementation of the projects. And in those projects, you usually get shifted to Kabul. So it comes to Kabul, and people are deprived, especially women, in those areas. And secondly, as I talked about the poppy cultivation, the worst hit region is the Helmand and provinces across the region, Kandahar and the western Afghanistan. So all in all, pretty grim situation, and continuing with that, where development has regressed on many fronts. We have been going backwards, but in the meantime, the humanitarian crisis are exacerbating and eating Afghanistan and Afghan people. And I say people with a bold, making it bold just because of the fact that those sitting in the centers of power are not feeling any of the effect of this. And that is why when you talk about regional cooperation, finding ways of diplomacy with Pakistan and Tip, we don't care. You talk about international relation and finding a way to talk to the world through diplomacy, we don't care. And that leaves the common Afghan suffer from the situation. So yeah, unfortunately we have very sad situation. And Afghan people are really suffering, and I suffered that, like I said.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I do have questions, but I'll pull them up because I want to hear your questions first, and I will ask mine if I have time. I just want to put 2 points in there. One, please ask a question that was stated earlier. Do not, if you want to talk to our speakers afterward, or if you have a dialogue, please do so, but write down questions so everybody can get their questions in. If I see somebody giving a speech, I will stop. I'll do that. That's number one. Number two, I just want to say something while you're asking your questions to think about it in the panel, because I think amazing points were raised. One country that we did not hear about was China. If you want the United States' interests, that prediction could be one of the reasons. Afghanistan in itself, I have said this before, people may not like it. Nobody went for Afghanistan because of Afghanistan, except Pakistan. That's the only exception. Everybody went there because of something else. Had 9/11 not happened, the United States, those of you living here longer, we closed the Afghan Bureau and the State Department after 1990s. It used to be part of Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh, or something like that. They closed the Afghanistan side. That's how much interest was. So 9/11 was the reason. So if attention is required, it has to be something that has to do more. With all due respect, some of the things we worry about are not worrisome to this bigger picture. China is. So I just leave that. Floor is open. Please raise your hand and introduce yourself and ask a question. If it is directed to a specific member of the panel, mention that. If it's to the panel, I will give it to someone. Please. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So I'm Pastis Mustafa. That after 5 years of the Taliban's return, what do you think the international community got fundamentally wrong in Afghan policy?
Well, I think the international community in general was tiring of the long involvement it was going to take. I remember when I was there in 29, 10, and 11, and at that time we were privately arguing back to the United States that we really needed to plan on being involved for another 15 or 20 years in Afghanistan, because this was going to take a long development effort to encourage the government to have them adopt new approaches, to have aid come in to educate people, to build up a larger educated group. And I think that was a wise look at things, and the United States just wasn't willing to continue that engagement. The willingness faded as we got to the second half of the, to 2014, 15, 16, and then continued. It was just going to take, from the perspective of most of those looking at from the U.S. side, a very consistently intense set of engagement to support Afghanistan to develop itself across a whole range of areas going forward. And we weren't willing to keep doing that as a body as a body politic. And there were many people who would have done that, but there were others who were just more interested in other things, including our presidents. So it was very hard. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned the United States do not have much influence with Taliban, but I mean US, fund Taliban. My understanding is when you fund a source, you have some influence. I'm wondering why we are not using that influence. If we fund the Taliban, there should be a percentage of influence that we could request from them. And if they do not accept, to stop their funding.
Well, I don't think we ever funded the Taliban per se. We continued giving money to Afghanistan, but it was humanitarian money going to humanitarian groups. And the Taliban, in its side comments and many other comments, which you have probably heard, so you're asking that even knowing, were quite clear that it was up to us if we wanted to keep giving that money, and they would welcome it, but they didn't see it really had something that they were asking for to benefit it. So it continued for a number of years afterwards, but it ended when the United States pulled out. And we did not provide a lot of the technical assistance that we believed would have been needed going forward. And nor do I think, clearly we did with the Taliban, with the kind of politically oriented assistance which we hoped would encourage more of a democratic type of society. Not a perfect democracy, but something that was allowing an interaction of people and a more democratic framework for what was going forward. That proved to be very difficult, and basically with the non-Taliban part of Afghan society splitting in many different ways, and in the end, as you know, leaving in many different ways from Afghanistan.
Thank you. Please, Beth.
Hello, I'm Lisa from Georgetown University. I really appreciate sharing your ideas, Ambassador Wayne and all the speakers. So I hope I'm not overwhelming, Ambassador. My question also goes to you. You did mention that American governments, though, they are interested for supporting Afghanistan people. But we unfortunately see the different phase of that. As our sister mentioned, that they are supporting, American government supporting like 40 million bi-weekly to Taliban government. And meanwhile, unfortunately, American government was failed in supporting Afghanistan people who supported his government, like the employees. We recently closed the Qatar camp, and those people, it is closed, unfortunately. My question, Ambassador, is that we live here, we love America, but American government unfortunately failed in supporting Afghanistan people, but they are very happy to support the Taliban. So in 5 years, our women, our girls are suffering from different situations. We do have very bad economy. We have very bad situation in Afghanistan. Except like meetings or conferences, there is not a real action about Afghanistan, unfortunately.
Ambassador, I would say one thing on that. That speaking here on my own behalf, I do work for the United States government, and I am not speaking on behalf of that. The idea of the money that goes, as the ambassador just mentioned, that goes to Afghanistan, whether it works or not, I'm not defending that. All I'm saying is the idea is you help the Afghan people. We just heard from our last panelist. He mentioned that Afghanistan is the second worst humanitarian problem in the world after the Sudan, which is a war for they're killing each other, which is not happening. So that reason is on a humanitarian issue. It is not a political issue. I would just leave the ambassador to say, I just want to put the clarification point. And the issue of here, I was actually on the receiving end of Hafiz coming here. The idea was that once the Afghans who come here go into different states of the United States, that the states and the local governance will take charge. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. I'm not saying the good or bad, that's not the issue. Now I leave it to the ambassador.
Do you know with those monies they are establishing madrasas in Afghanistan?
Yeah, that I don't know.
Those are not for the people. Those are going to the government, to the Taliban government. They are establishing madrasas.
They may be establishing madrasas, but they're doing that with their own money. That's not from USA.
In terms of money provided by the US, we remember that the US aid was dismantled and international funding was freezed by the Trump administration. Afterwards, when they made a decision to release the funding, the only two countries in the world that remain out of that authorization of release of fund is Afghanistan and Yemen. So on the papers, I mean formally, there's no funding going to Afghanistan since last year. Afghanistan and Yemen, two countries. And that's why the funding requirement remains 26%. The total funding that is required by the EU agencies and aid agencies in Afghanistan, we are at the middle of August, and only 26% of the humanitarian appeal has been fulfilled. So we are having a shortfall of 74%, and that's mainly because the US is not funding that appeal, and the other countries are not in a position to fulfill that gap, or fill that gap.
If you believe what you say, you should be acting here in the United States to get those with political influence to actually change their point of view and spend more money. There are Democrats in Congress who would like to spend more money. You were here, as you said. You can be active, and so can others.
Sir, in the back, please, because we talked more, and we only have a few minutes left. Please, dial.
So my name is Nabi, and I am one of the founder of the Interpreter. I just wanted to say that we protected the U.S. government and its military for 20 years. But we, a small group of Afghans here for the last 5 years, and it's been several times that we are directly targeted by the new administration just because of a mistake, one or two individuals. When our soldiers are killed and the ISIS to the custody by the agents, so the media and everyone is silent about that. So I just wanted to know, is there any action by the activists or the people who work directly with Afghans, like allowing the white people from Africa just because the president is favoring them, but blocking the West for those who fight together with the US soldier for 20 years.
There are actually organizations who are advocating for the cause that you mentioned, particularly with the cases of Iran, T2, SIV, and for all the others who have their pending cases and who are going through some of the issues that you mentioned. Unfortunately, I participate in some of those meetings also. Unfortunately, the doors are kind of closed at this point. There's not a lot of attention, not a lot of resources provided to address the issues that you highlighted, because it is really a kind of a political bid from the top, which organizations who are doing advocacy for the opponents who are based there on refugees are not very attentive. That's what at least, I mean, from my experience, you said there are no organization, but there are organizations. I'm going to give you the names after this session, the advocates and also organizations who are actively working with the Congress, by the way. So I can provide you with some of the names after.
And in fact, a large meeting yesterday across the whole country. So they are trying to organize, and they are organizing. They're finding different ways. And our senator was on yesterday talking about this and talking about the two bills that he and others have been sponsoring from the Democrat side. It's not necessarily going to go forward, but they are active. And so you should be involved with that group. And they have all sorts of Afghan Americans and Americans involved in this.
Well, I have been informed by my higher authorities there that our time is over. I thank our panelists. Thank you for sticking to time. Thank you for all the, I think, important things raised. I know the questions came a lot to the ambassador because that is in the people's hearts. So those of you who didn't get a chance to ask, we stuck at time, the time is out. Please talk to them maybe afterwards. Thank you very much for listening, and I am done.
It was someone from Afghanistan who is a European country. During a mistake in France, they lost the power. He asked for Brumbies about why they lost the power. He said, in order to offer a escape to audition, every year we turn off the live cost for 1 minute. He said, no, it's not good. We do not offer what it should be. Come to Afghanistan and see in 24 hours. We take a research in 23 hours out of 24 hours. The turn off the light was something that is happening in Afghanistan. The people are suffering, and that's the job, is the real job that we are suffering in Afghanistan. Before going to our second panel, please join me to welcome Dr. Bulrani, Assistant Professor of Political Sociology affiliated to Georgetown University and George Mason University, George Washington University, to present an overview of recent books on Afghanistan collapse and also co-authored by American scholars.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here to present my recent assessment about the Afghanistan's collapse literature. Before that, I would like to ask you questions. Does anyone read these books about the collapse, which is after the paper Afghanistan by the Taliban, the Western, and also other have been read 16 books. Does anyone read these books? Please raise your hand. After the paper Afghanistan by the Taliban, as I mentioned, they published 16 books from different aspects, different arguments, different methods, and also which is I divided and categorized them in a 6 analytical stream. However, I have few minutes. It's pretty hard for me to elaborate and present all this literature. I'm grateful recently I published, which is recently published by the Rumi House in Persian, this book review, and just briefly I would like to share some thought about that. The first stream was about the foreign policy and decision making. The recent new books about the choosing defense, which is Paul Miller is my colleague at Georgetown University, was about the choosing defense. About Afghanistan, also the Fifth Act, Kabul Evkaf, and Afghanistan paper, the Kabul Final Call. These books, the main argument about the foreign policy, also decision making about Afghanistan, they focused on decision made in Washington over 20 years. And their argument was that the collapse was not just the final withdrawal, it's many political and strategical mistake over many years. The number two, which is, is originally from Afghanistan, how to lose a war, and also the American war in Afghanistan. The American war in Afghanistan, which is published before the collapse, I think, before the August 21, was about the war and military failure. They focus on decision making. They focus on Taliban insurgency, the Afghanistan security force, and also the role of the Pakistan. However, the how to lose a war was a mixture of the foreign policy, international community, international intervention in Afghanistan. But I have to say something in Persian, which is my colleague told me I have to share this thought about in bilingual. Kitab How to Lose a War, I'll publish this article in English, which is already translated. I hope I can submit it somewhere to publishing these books. Next. This is the one of the books which is Jamal was involved as a co-author. They discuss about the state building institution, also corruption, and also foreign intervention in Afghanistan. The main argument of that book are that the collapse cannot be explained only by the US or Taliban. The Republic had a serious internal weakness. Stream number 4. Perhaps, the author of the Taliban, Hassan Abbas, which is this book translated in Persian. Does anyone read this book? It's in Persian. These books, 3 books, about the Taliban governance system. They examine the Taliban leadership, ideology, internal functions, also institutions at their courts. And I think they help us understand how the Taliban moved from the insurgents movement to governing system. The number 5. This book's particularly close to my argument, and also, which is I recently write an article from sociological perspective and rereading the Asabiyya Ibn Khaldun, and I describe about the internal and one main argument was about the Swiss that the collapse was in village. The Afghanistan government collapsed in village, not from the Kabul, from foreign policy or somewhere. But the books about the Kabul, the airport, the evacuation, soldiers, diplomats, and these books are the powerful account of what the final days felt in Kabul. The last, which is recently published by a group of Afghanistan diaspora perspective, it's an editor book, which is, I think, 11 Afghanistan's scholar. There's like a collective later articles and about Afghanistan from different perspective. این آخرین و جدیدترین لیترچر یا ادبیات هست که در حوزه صعود نوشته شده که مجموعه از اسکولارهای افغانستان در مورد افغانستان مباحث مطرح کردن از لحظه‌های مختلف. البته این کتاب لیفسنداش this book was not from Leicester Lathor. The Afghanistan scholar read this book. But I have the first thing. The society is missing almost all of this book center the state, army, foreign power, Taliban, also international intervention, international community, but the ordinary people are missed of this book. Number 2, writing from the outside, not from the ground or from the inside of Afghanistan. And also number 3, which is super interesting for me, women are absent. We have no author that she wrote about something about the collapse from women's legs with the collapse in Afghanistan from the ground, which is, I think, this is the main responsibility of our women's scholar to fill this gap. Second?
Hard to get published.
Absolutely, but we are here to collaborate, and for any publication, just reach out personally to me, and I'll be happy to assist for the publication, for any events, because we are in the same team. So this is the main priority. Also, the last thing, which is I already mentioned in my piece, was about the methodological. 16 books, they are not exact methods from any aspects. When you read these books, you try to figure out what is the methods from political science, from sociological science, or from some other perspective. But this is the main critique, which is I mentioned in my recent piece. And also it's available in Persian, and I will try to translate in English. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burhani, for your assessments. We will come back to one of your questions, but what we have done at the end of the second panel, we have another presentation which says that Yeah, that's I think from our side for Afghanistan. Please join me in welcoming our second moderator and our distinguished panelists. This panel will explore the large varieties of gender apartheid, women and youth strike of fundamental rights, education under Taliban rule, and the courageous local efforts keeping with patient and civil assistance alive. I now hand over the stage to our panel moderator, Mr. Fariha Isaq. Ms. Fariha Isaq is an international legal professional with more than 15 years of experience advising governments, justice institutions, and international organizations on rule of law, criminal justice reform, legal and regulatory reform, government accountability, and gender justice. And our moderator panels are Mitra Migran, Tariq Osman, Samim Indi, and also Dr. Abumar Sharifi.
Education, work, freedom. These are the words of women of Afghanistan that have carried into the streets and their protests and in their demands for dignity and justice. And perhaps there is something important about the simplicity of these three words. They are not demands for privilege. They are demands for the basic condition of dignified human life, the right to live and the right to exist. 5 years after the Taliban returned to power, those three demands remain at the center of Afghanistan's human rights crisis. Women's civil and political rights, as well as their economic, social, and cultural rights, have been systematically violated, restricted, and denied across virtually every sphere of public and private life. There is a name for this system of institutionalized exclusion and discrimination, and that is gender apartheid. We must nail it, recognize it, and confront it as it is. And yet women of Afghanistan continue to speak up, protest, and fight for their rights every day and as we speak. By now we know more than ever that what is happening in Afghanistan and what has happened. So today's conversation is not simply about what is happening or what has happened in Afghanistan. It is about asking a harder question. What do we do with what we already know now? How do we create a meaningful leverage? Or how do we protect independent media, education, and the people who continue to speak up? These are the questions I hope we can discuss in our panel today. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge how we may be feeling today. Speaking about Afghanistan has not been easy for me, and I'm sure it is not easy for all of us. The pain, the grief, and the wounds we carry for over 5 years. And as you can see, what you're seeing is just a tiny bit of the institutionalized oppression against women and girls in Afghanistan. The first thing comes in my mind looking at her is how she would feel with that forced burqa wearing. Can she breathe? Can she see the beauty that we all deserve to see? The answer is no. How she would eat with that burqa. This is not our culture, and this is not Islamic too. We have this Mazhab here, he can also talk about that, but that's what's happening. So yes, it is not easy to talk about what is happening in Afghanistan. It has not always been easy for us. Whereas if we feel emotional or if we feel nervous, and it is okay to feel emotional and cry, because that is the human's normal feeling. And I will say to the men in the panel and to the men in the audience that it's also okay for you guys to cry, because the wounds and grief and the pain for over 5 years that we carry with ourselves is not, it's not easy. And what we are today, like 5 years ago, we lost everything. So how you could feel, and the people who are still there, and they're home, but in their prison. I would also like to pause and recognize the human cost behind this too. Over the past decade, people of Afghanistan have lost their lives in the battle for freedom, dignity, justice, and better future. I would like to invite everyone to stand for a moment of silence in a memory of all those we have lost in the pursuit of freedom, justice, and dignity.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Let me briefly introduce our panelists. We have Ms. Vidra Mehran, gender equality and human rights activist, Mr. Mohammad Tariq Osman, PhD director, PhD candidate, and Deputy Director of Afghanistan Scholars Association, Mr. Sani Mahdi, journalist, former editor-in-chief, and co-founder of Almo TV, and finally, Mr. Muhammad Umar Sharif, Mr. Umar Sharifi, Assistant Professor of Social Science and Humanities at the American University of Afghanistan. Thank you all for being here. Each panelist will have 3 to 4 minutes for the first response, and I will ask a follow-up question if time allows, and then we will give 10 to 12 minutes for our audience to ask their questions, and I will try my best to keep us all on time so that everyone could participate in the discussion, but I would apologize in advance if I cut you off if you go over the time limit, because we have all our reads, they will not allow us to go over the time that we are given. So, to start, I wanted to begin with you. 5 years after the Taliban returned to power, we have accumulated an enormous amount of documentations, investigations, reports, and we have also heard millions of international condemnations. Yet, the situation has continued to deteriorate. So the question I have for you is, has documentation become a substitute to leverage for action? And if so, where do you think the international community has failed to convert knowledge into therapy?
Thank you, Parayajan, so much. Happy to be here. In relation to that question about documentation, I want to briefly respond to the previous speaker. There are so many amazing women who published books in the past 2 years. Book on Malak Qadri's book is a very good one about the evacuation and withdrawal. Marcel Sois did an amazing, powerful book collecting stories of women about Afghanistan. Zahra Julia did another very, very good book last year. And also Zadaros Muhammad published a book on universal jurisdiction that's being used by international courts now, and it will be taught in different universities across Aniyabad. And I'm sure there's so many other books, and we see amazing academic articles coming out from women. So I really appreciate if you look deeper and don't say the women are not doing enough. About the question, I think I'm not sure if it's the right word to put documentation as a substitute for action. I think documentation is manuscript of the work. movement of women of Afghanistan has been doing as part of Black international accountability mechanisms. They're leveraging to keep both Taliban and international community accountable in how they approach Afghanistan or peace of Afghanistan. And that includes making them to have a more responsible foreign policy, including the United States as a government. I think you did a clear picture or painted a clear picture of what's happening in Afghanistan. I appreciate Srina for showcasing. Of course, that is a reality in Afghanistan. Or whoever was walking, sorry, but I didn't recognize. But also there is another recognition that we need to make sure to realize that yes, Taliban are oppressing women of Afghanistan with laws and policies and are enforcing it with their terrorist regime. But that's not who women of Afghanistan are. They're individuals with agency. They're those for resisting women, Taliban, and trying to keep the civic space alive underground and take the resistance forward. So that's who women of Afghanistan are. And what we see usually pictured and painted in international media is what the Taliban want to make them to be, but that's not who they are. And in response to the question, so now I have my 4 minutes, right? I think everyone did put into perspective what's happening, and everyone in the room knows what's happening in Afghanistan. Women of Afghanistan haven't allowed international community or anyone to substitute action with documentation or anything. So I will mention briefly what have been happening and hopefully call for action. I think what I have been wishing and hope and call on everyone is how we can make August 15 a day of call for action. In relation to the accountability and documentation work that Women of Afghanistan and of course International Human Rights Organization and Civil Society of Afghanistan, including men and women, have been doing, it's not only resulted in condemnation. International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants against 2 of the Taliban members. 2 days ago, they issued arrest warrants for 2 more of the Taliban members. The name is not going to be public, and the reason is if ICC make it public, then they will stop traveling. So it's a good sign. If those 2 members travel outside, hopefully that lead to their arrest. International Criminal Justice Court, as you know, Germany, Netherlands, Australia, and Canada promised us to take the case of Afghanistan forward using CELO. They are delaying, but then I think everyone is pushing on, and hopefully we see a result there. Codification of gender apartheid has been a big thing. April 30th was the official deadline for countries to propose gender apartheid to be included in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty. We had 7 states that sent a proposal. We needed 1, but now we have 7, which is strong. And gender apartheid is officially on the table for negotiation, which I think both, yes, technically it's important, legally it's important, but also for creation of global solidarity as a movement that we can push all the states and countries come together, I think is key. We have we pushed Human Rights Council to adopt the independent investigative mechanism. So hopefully that will be operational by September and October. And because we all are, and I call on all of you to watch those, help those processes and contribute. And then lastly, because we are sitting in DC, we are also working hard to push US government in Congress to have a clear foreign policy on Afghanistan. So there are few bills that you can help in knowing that your representatives or ask your American friends if you don't have documentation like me yet to have a representative at the Congress, is reject the Erasure of Afghan Women in Both Act. We have been working with Congresswoman Dove's office. It's introduced, and the good thing is it passed HFAC committee, Foreign Affairs Committee. So now we need enough push by different congressmen and women so they can take it to the floor. Also last week, in occasion of August 15, Congress Senator whose office introduced a bill on supporting temporary protected status for Afghans or people of Afghanistan who are here in the U.S. You can write to your representative to support that too, and then maybe we can dig deeper in the second question. If you have, if you need information on any of these bills, how you can contribute, let me know.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rajan. I think there are some proofs for hope. Some actions have taken, but the question is that enough? The answer is no, not at all. We can do more. Usman Saib, I wanted to ask about the work that you do. Your work brings us directly to one of the institutions through which a society reproduces knowledge and values, and that's education. The question I have for you is that what is the rationale behind the Taliban's restrictions on women's education, academic freedom, and universities? Are we looking at temporary policy exclusion, or is a broader attempt to restructure Afghanistan and education system?
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. Thank you for your question. I will directly go there and not talk about 10 apartheid. 7 minutes and 4 minutes. The main point is that when it's coming to extremism and extremists, we have to first locate Taliban in that faith. According to what I know, there are 2 types of extremists and militant among Muslims. One is the classic and one is the modern. The Taliban are the classic extremists and related. They have some specific characteristics about women. And that is not new, that is coming from long time. And it is also recorded in some books, unfortunately called either Tafsir or Yisu. But not in Quran, not in Hadith, and not in Hanafi school of thought. One is that they don't want women to go out of home. That's their character. As previously Mr. Rahim mentioned, that women are more frustrated in Helmand, in Orzgan, in Kandahar, rather than any part of the country. The other characteristic that they have, they don't want women to be educated at all. If some, that is only the duties that they have to do at home. The third characteristic is that Taliban are afraid of women educated. As the century ago authoritarian regime, which replaced Khilafah, they also did the same thing. And this is not new. This is coming from long time. Because if the extremist is not in power, he is violent and he is killing and ransoming people and torturing people. If they are in power, they are authoritarian and they do istibdad. I believe everyone knows. For that reason, I will not go long with that. When we characterize them like this, they lack or they have little knowledge of religion. But the modern extremists, they are a little bit more knowledgeable. That's where the formula is coming. A Muslim becomes extremist when he has good faith, honesty, and integrity, but he doesn't have religious knowledge. And that's what is lacking in Taliban. For that reason, they are doing something
which is not done by any, not supported by any text of Quran and Sunnah in Harbi school of thought. And one of them was the burqa. The burqa is worn to animal during the Jahiliyyah of Arab, and that's in the book. No, I'm not talking from my own. And then that's word to the woman for humiliation of women at that time. No one can find any evidence that during the Prophet and the four successor, anyone forced burqa. Hijab is not the clothes of women. Hijab is not the clothes of women. That's the curtain that we have everywhere in the window, in the door. The Sharia thing is satr awra. You cannot find hijab as a clothes of women in any book of from Quran and Sunnah in the Hanafi school of thought. In even other verse, but this is school of thought. I will stop here.
Thank you, Usman Saib. I wanted to do a follow-up question on expansion of madrasas and how difficult it is to reverse that. But if time allows, I'll come back to you. But I want to bring you back, Mitra John, about the important point Usman Saib mentioned, and that is how this writing education is part of the process. That system becomes rooted in the education system and the extremism has become rooted in the system. So does this change how we should think about the international response to gender apartheid? What's your insight on that?
You have 1 minute to respond. Thank you so much. Yes, when we describe a context as gender apartheid, it doesn't just target an individual group or a certain context or controlling an one single right. Rather, it's about utilizing an institutionalized regime of oppression that target, for example, the regime of the Taliban as a whole. So it includes education sector, economic, humanitarian aid, everything as a regime or how it is institutionalized and established. That's why in this cross, it is one of the elements that we do legally take to the court is the intention behind gender apartheid, and that's sustainability of the regime. And for that purpose, they need to socially engineer society in a way that be capable of adopting Taliban or Talibanism as a regime. And that's why we see the process of madrasification. I think Dr. Subahi has an interest in research on that too. Yes, women in girls are not allowed to go to school or have access to education, but we are closely seeing how they're changing the curriculum for men and boys who are having access to education. And that social engineering is also reflected within the PVPV law in Penal Code. For example, in Penal Code, yes, there is punishment for how women dress or the freedom of movement in Mahan, but then down there you see another article following that subject mean to punishment to a woman or not included properly. And also in the penal code authorized man as an owner of the woman. And so is reflected within the curriculums we see within the schools and universities. So that process of madrasification is one of the key elements we are studying in terms of how that helps social engineering for the sustainability of gender apartheid as a regime within Afghanistan.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chang. We talked about controlling what people are able to learn. Mr. Rani, I want to come to you. I want to turn to another form of controlling, and that is controlling what people are able to know. Some of the questions we always hear is 5 years of the Taliban in power. Has independent Afghanistan journalism survived? Or we always hear that will we have a meaningful independent media in Afghanistan at all, or in exile, or underground, or online? Or has the Taliban succeeded in creating a predominantly controlled environment of information sharing? So the question I have for you, Isai, is the international community once supported and celebrated our the journalism in Afghanistan, our journalists in Afghanistan. What does
the outside world, all those journalists now. And I do want to have a second question for you. You can catch on that too. There's a tension here that we all have, and that is the risks involved in this work. So how an international community could support the journalism in Afghanistan, the journalists in Afghanistan, or who is outside in this sector, so that we keep the information, spread, and the people have access to that, but at the same time minimize the risk for those who share these, information.
Thank you so much for the organizers of this event, and thank you for running Afghanistan 5 years after the tragic collapse. Not just the gathering, which was called the public, which was weak, which was corrupt, unfortunately, but the hopes of people as well, and the dreams that at least my generation aspired for about 2 decades. But I am still hopeful that we will regain our country on the track. Coming to the question of media and freedom of expression, has it survived under the Taliban or not? I should say that free flow of information in Afghanistan has survived. And it is due to the commitment of journalists that we have in Afghanistan and outside the country, especially in the form of exiled media. I think it's a point of joy and happiness to see major newspapers such as Kashtasot and ادبیات have survived. They continued, they didn't stop their work even for a week. They continued reporting on Afghanistan about the Taliban from the August 15 onward until today. And also, other media outlets were created in exile, like TV, which I was involved for 4 years. Afghanistan International, very beautiful media outlets led by women like Zabajua and other friends. These are great examples of resilience of the media community and journalists in Afghanistan. And I should say that maybe one of the reasons that Taliban are not internationally recognized yet is the fact and because of these media outlets who kept exposing the Taliban in the past 5 years, while the Taliban were able to control media inside the country. If you're asking about media in exile, that's the situation. But if you are asking about media inside the country, it's very tragic and it's a very unfortunate picture. Taliban have full control on government media like RTA and others. Taliban have, unfortunately, full editorial control on private media, which were the beacons of democracy in the past 20 years. And just if you go these days and compare their coverage of what's happening, for example, in Badakhshan, you would see what Talibanized media means. It's very clear, unfortunately. And also Taliban have been creating and building new media. I will name you a number. For example, Hurriyat Radio, Umaid Radio. These are two big names nowadays in Afghanistan. They are supported by GDI, the Taliban Intelligence Directorate. And also, dozens, maybe hundreds of YouTube channels. Some of them are fully funded by the Taliban. It's also true that YouTubers who broadcast from Afghanistan, what has happened to freedom of expression in Afghanistan, I will give you some numbers. Over 700 cases of violence against media and journalists. about 60% of all media outlets are ceased to exist or operate. In the past year, we had 15 journalists arrested by the Taliban who were sentenced from 6 months to 10 years in prison. For example, there's this journalist who used to work for Australian outlets. His name is Harfijan. He has been sentenced for 10 years in prison. And Taliban, unfortunately, have terrorized journalists inside the country, and working for foreign-based media has become a national crime, meaning it is categorized as espionage and treason. And media laws such as the mass media law and access to information law doesn't exist anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahdi Saib. It is very tragic to hear what is happening, just exercising the very basic right to have access to information. I want to come back to you, Mr. Rawal, but before coming to you, I wanted to ask a follow-up question from Usman Saib. But I also want to mention that we have not forgotten you guys as well, and we'll have you to ask your question too. Usman Saib, if you could please address the question I asked about the expansion of madrasas and how difficult it is to reverse what is the information or the education, the so-called curricula or information that is being taught in madrasas or in schools. If you could address that in 1.5 minutes, please.
The main point is that changing madrasas, schools named madrasa is not a big problem, because in Saudi Arabia all schools are called madrasa. But the main point is what is the curriculum that they are teaching, how they teach it, and who teaches. And that's where the worry about Taliban raised. Because if they are teaching the same thing that they are practicing on Afghan people and women, then that's not Islam, and that is exactly the classic violent extremism that they do. The reversification, that is possible, but one thing that we all know, that treatment by curative means cannot guarantee the treatment of a patient. In the same time, cannot guarantee the death of that person. And that is very costly. There is need for preventative measures to be taken, because they are cheap, they are easy, and they are good to do it before we die.
Thank you, Usman Saib. How important it is to realize once that we have the systems, educational system that we could rely on, and the information and the subjects that were taught that we could trust. But now, like every day, we hear thousands and thousands of madrasas being registered, and the more you see women are joining, and it's so scary to hear, the way that the kids, even the women now think, because of such information that is being controlled or taught to our girls and kids inside the country. Thank you for addressing that, Usman Saib. Coming back to you, Mr. Umar, we talked about what has happened in Afghanistan and what has been done so far. But I wanted to step back a little bit on the question of why we have arrived here, why we are what we are experiencing now. What has happened to bring us to the stage that we are now? 25 years of youth engagement in Afghanistan involved intervention, counterterrorism, state building, institutional building, and ultimately peace negotiation and withdrawal. I was one of those who have been leading and overseeing all the projects that was, part of the institutionalization of like criminal justice system reforms, laws, and regulations for 15 years. And that is a whole lot that we has given to not only we, but so many of our people and the system that we have built for in a blink of an eye, we lost everything. The systems, laws, and whatever you can name it. So the question I have for you, Sarah, is what are the most important lessons that the United States should take from those 25 years? And I want to connect your answer to what we have heard so far from the other panelists. Mr. John has talked about the leverage and what has happened and what has been done so far. Usman has talked about education and the next generation, and also Mr. Mati talked about the survival of independent media in Afghanistan. Where do you see the greatest gap between what a national community says it wants for Afghanistan and the tools it actually utilizes and learning to use?
Thank you. I think it would be much appropriate if you ask this question for a minority here, or an Afghan person goes through that. And also, I think to be asked for this question requires a prophet, not a professor. Somebody has to be there to actually say, can predict. But at least one thing, when we look at the letters produced, Briske or Afghanistan body. When you look at the literatures produced on Afghanistan by American scholars, and also the way the Afghans now engage with it, both in terms of writing and also in terms of virtual space, with this question of what happened and how we have to learn from this, how we have to move forward. In this case, I think having all these issues now come into fore that actually helps us to understand, deconstruct, and more importantly, in a way, to critique the whole concept of intervention that we shaped American intervene. The United States and the international community's presence in Afghanistan, what we've seen as an intervention in Afghanistan, with all the institution that was produced in the course of 20 years, enormous amount of money. When you look at it in a comparative way with, for instance, the models that was applied in, for instance, the Balkans, we apply for Iraq, we apply for African cases, you suddenly find a bizarre sort of similarity between all these models, despite enormous differences, social, linguistic, historical differences that exist between, sociological differences that exist between all these communities. So suddenly, and then we see from the whole intervention in Afghanistan was not actually something unique by itself, it was part of an ongoing international communities modeled apart in many other places with varying degree of success, or a lot of its success, lack of success, and that is applied again on Afghanistan. Not something, and what you feel in like the design, the implementation, and the arguments around that is actually bizarrely the Afghan voice is modestly silent in how his projects, how his ideas were, how to build a government, how to do state building, how to nation building that process, that the voice of the Afghans are very silent. And if you look at the actions of the Afghan leadership, especially the Republican, both those who the past product with the main kind of ruling elite in Afghanistan for the last 20 years, and their kind of that Northern Alliance, Mujahideen kind of colleagues who came in there. You see that the politics of somehow like the inability to critique that approach become more and more, and every year become more common. Suddenly you stop asking questions about the logic of any project as long as you even had done the project. Now, so you see that progressively from 2002 to 3, it continues all the way until the end of the Republic. And one thing, if you look again at the experience of us as Afghans who live there, who actually found meaning and opening after the 2001 intervention, and more importantly embraced for the first time after many years a hope, a dream of being back on our feet and being back as a country. Well, when you look at all this literature and experience of us, and it's surprising that where you don't find much in the entire project or the process is Afghan sovereignty. The sovereignty of Afghan government, the sovereignty of Afghan state, despite pushing for democracy, policies that promoted democracy at the end of the day undermine democratic procedures. So you see the sovereignty that exists in that, and also this like international model in a way ignore the local and indigenous agency in what are the needs and priorities of us for that. This is, I think, one of the biggest lessons we have learned about whether the Americans can learn or not. We only can pray for now.
Thank you. Your point reminds me of the conversation, the very conversation I had with one of my colleagues when I was invited at the State Department to talk about lessons learned in the of the United States and how we can improve it. Me as an employee, and one of my colleagues, we were talking about the lessons and all of it, and then my colleague in the panel turned the face and said to everyone that we are hearing all the lessons that we should learn. Are we learning the lessons that we should learn? And the answer is obviously no. And I hope and we pray if that changes. Thank you, Mr. Mark. I want to bring us all back to the question of what comes next. And I want to ask all the panelists to answer the question that I will share with you, and each of you have 1 minute to address, and that is, if you could change one thing about the national response to Afghanistan over the next 12 months, what that would be. We will start with Mr. Ahmad and then Mr. Mohammed. If we could change one thing from the international community that they have been considering the situation, if that could be changed and that could be one thing, what would be that? The way that they respond to the situation and they have done so far in ideas.
Okay, to be very honest, I don't have an answer, very good answer for this question, but I face giving that for the fact that we're facing it. The international community and the United States itself is going through an enormous transition. And the aid at the process of transition, we see political transition, ethical transition, policy transition, army transition, almost everything, every level. So in this case, I think the ability of us to actually keep a level of cohesion among ourselves, or what do we want from whatever comes out of that, out of this process? What do we ask? Can we ever compromise on the values that the race shaped, made us as a generation that is of us as a democracy, human rights, human dignity, and human rights? Can we keep the cohesion to ask these questions more forcibly, but consistently, and then allow ourselves in this particular age of transition in the United States and the whole community to somehow become opportunistic and sometimes change our messages, our demands, because of circumstances changes. I think that would be my thing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would say stop appeasement. Appeasement policy never worked with the Taliban, and it will never work with the Taliban. And you will not get human rights, women's rights, freedom of expression, and your peace with appeasement. And let me also say that why you're acting like human rights, women's rights, minorities' rights, freedom of expression, as they were isolated agents. You cannot have them under the Taliban. That's very basic. We should not lose hope for democracy in my country. This is the basic that I think we have lost in the past 5 years, being busy with so many other areas. This is the basic thing. Let's not lose hope for democracy. Democracy didn't, lost in Afghanistan. It was the government which lost. It was international community which lost in Afghanistan. When, an 80-year-old woman in Banya goes and votes in the election day, it means people understand democracy and they support elected officials. It was the officials, the government, the international community, which corrupted the system and the entire process. That's why, first, stop appeasement. Second, don't lose hope on democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Mahdi. That's exactly right. The international community keeps talking about Taliban 2.0, and I am one of the example of the kid that who been deprived of the education for 5 years, and their first burn, being in power. And you can ask me and many others who are here experienced the regime. Do you see any change? So there's no hope for like asking the Taliban to talk about respect human rights or minority rights. That's not in their nature. If they would, they wouldn't be called Taliban. So thank you for reminding us, Mr. Mahdi. Osman Saib, we go with you and then Mitajan.
Yeah, thank you. The time I agree with Nadi said that Taliban cannot become a human being by peace solutions. That's very clear. Don't expect that. The other point is, if we want, we need two things that Afghan has to do it, then international community. The Afghan have to be united and support the women, the education, and religious community to defend the religion in front of these non-religious people in Taliban. You know that the most minoritized people in Afghanistan are religious scholars. Even now, our sisters, they have some support. Our media has some support. But I'm suffering. I work with scholars inside Afghanistan that we cannot offer them $50 for a living cost. That's the situation. For that reason, bring together all Afghans, put all these ethnicity and everything outside, and be one nation, then we can find support for international community.
Thank you so much. Because most of the audience are from Afghanistan, so I think I will share what we are thinking in our line of work. And we have a timeline now for the negotiation and codification of gender apartheid. What have happened in the past 4 or 5 years for the right reasons is we have been very reactionary to everything. And that was every day I monitored the Taliban decrees and how they're shaping the legal system and governing system. Government is not the right word, but the regime. I woke up every 2-month decree of like ban on education, and then they go deep now. Even there's a crazy decree that says the kitchen shouldn't have window, or they are issuing traffic tickets in Herat to women if they are not dressed properly. So that's what I've kept my mind occupied, and actually a new line of work you wouldn't mind. But it seems Taliban are staying there for as much as I hate to say it, for sometimes, even if it's a year or so. So the question is how we strategize and then maintain the cohesion, and as Dr. Persif said, among each other to ensure this ecosystem that needs to be strengthened to end the Taliban or empowered in all of them are activity. If it's the economic sector, the religious scholars, the media, the accountability space and human rights work that we do, the academia, because what has happened, I will take maybe a bit longer, because what has happened between 1996 to 2001 was the same thing. We didn't tell our own story of what Taliban means for us. I went to school in Badakhshan after the first year of Taliban. I didn't see a single page in my book that speak about Taliban's atrocities. I came to Kabul, I went to museum once. You couldn't see anything in the museum of Kabul that speak about what women went through. Yes, United States government very smartly used that lashing in our stadium to justify its intervention. And I do remember how American war changed to Afghanistan war at some point. But it's interesting that we need to also tell our own stories for my work and hopefully for everyone within the framework of apartheid, what Taliban means, what it means for us. And then if Taliban are gone tomorrow, what that transition means to us as a community. I think that is very key and that's very important because we didn't have a transition justice system beyond 2001. And then that's why everything was lunar dependent or how organization can spend the money. So I think what in the coming year is important. The documentation is key, and I think a lot of good organizations are doing it. But also we need to do more storytelling. We need to see this, as much as it's hard. I don't want to be in this process, but now that we are, we need to leverage it to see it as a transitional process from a Taliban that are socially, or an ideology that are socially and culturally entrenched within that society. It's not about the regime. Even if the Taliban are gone tomorrow, how we want to deal with that ideology going forward, that I think we didn't do a good job after 2001. So the whole thing is how we can maintain the cohesion, and then within that, how we strategize and ensure, if I am a media person, if I'm a teacher or anyone I am, how I can take pieces of this puzzle forward. That's the other thing. And then for everyone else, we have 2 bills in Congress now, TPS and also rejecting Irregular and Goals Act. Please make sure that in the coming year, right to representatives to support that bill in the Congress. We're trying to make it bipartisan. But also when you refer to Afghanistan, use the gender apartheid as a terminology to describe the situation. I think it has the power and potential to create that global solidarity we need for Afghanistan, that is necessary for creating both ethical and legal obligation for every land to be responsible or act more responsible toward Afghanistan. And then we cannot get to that democracy. These have said that there should be the energy and the thing that trigger us to do the work, as long as we don't end gender apartheid in Afghanistan. Yes, politically, but also culturally and socially. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. John, and everyone for addressing that. I cannot disagree about how reactive we have been in 5 years. We have not got together. We are not united. That's what we all hear, and this is the case, and that's the fact. We are, strategically, tackling the issues, but. I also wanted to mention that if we're waiting for others to help us, and if you're not doing our own homework, and we lay back, who gonna address the issue, our own issue? So it is exactly right that we have to step up and do different, to do the things differently, analyze and see what we have, what has worked so far and what has not. So we need to change the strategy that we have been following, and that's not working. But at the same time, I want to mention, and I want to acknowledge the fact that the Taliban are being supported, normalized by the international community in some countries, engaging with them with no way of engaging with it. I mean, asking them to come to the Europe, where women and girls are abandoned in the country, how we could fight with this regime with empty hands. So it's not an either or, it is how we can come together to fight against terrorism, extremism, and it is not just about women's issue anymore. It is about the global security. It is about terrorism. So how we can fight together against terrorism, and I think if we do so, we would be able to at least do something that is different a little bit. But I also wanted to mention that we shouldn't leave the work of human rights to women's rights only to women of Afghanistan. It is not just women's rights issue. It is a humanity issue. It is a terrorism issue. It is an extremism issue. So all men and women should come together to fight this fight. And I call the point that one of our colleagues mentioned at the beginning, asking that women should take action and do it. And thank you for mentioning some of the reports that has been done so far by women, but it is not an issue of women only. It is an issue of terrorism and extremism, and we all should come together. All right, we have not forgotten you guys. Now is the time that you could raise your hands and ask your question. Please direct your question to a panelist and naming them. We could go first, and then you second.
I have actually one question and comment for Swasa, and also adding to the session about absence of known authors. I didn't see my book, by the way. I published a book, December of 2021, and that was about the issues inside Afghanistan. Yeah, come on. All right, so coming back to the madrasas, I conducted a research house there from 23 provinces to see the impact of madrasas on the issue of security. And first of all, madrasa was already funded by Uzbekistan, Saudis, Afghanistan, and I had a discussion also with Uzbek representative there in Washington. They said that yes, we do fund, and they have exposure with this also for madrasa. My 75% of respondents who their boys or girls were going to madrasas had negative observation of the madrasas. So the fundamentals of Islam, some may matters, but the jihadi Islam is another thing. That teaching the students about the extreme version and jihad and violence, they were the points that came out from the interviews that was conducted in 23 provinces. Violence, jihadism, they were doing thematic coding, by the way. So this was the word that came out for the thematic coding with the group of researchers that I asked them to tell that. So they were all the daily forms of teaching, like even violence, fights. They were all the people that the students of those madrasas were highlighting. So don't you see this expansion of madrasas, find it broadly from the regional countries, we're going to create really a next group of literacy in Afghanistan, or the other militant from the region will also join those madrasas, either in terms of funding or teaching. So don't you see that would expand to that go to that direction at any point? Thank you.
Thank you for also your research results. However, I usually, when you say something negative, our international colleagues, they ask what I have to say. They don't hear it until they do not face it. For that reason, Taliban will not be only a problem for Afghanistan, not only for the region, but they will be a problem for the whole world. Because Boko Haram already recognized it. The problem is that no one knows that they are not religious people. Everyone in the world thinks that they are good government, they bring the good Islamic government. I had a training in USIP for the Nigerian scholars. When I presented the issue of Taliban, especially the women, then after the presentation, they asked me, we didn't thought that they will be like this. We thought they were good people and that's the only Islamic government in the world. That's the perception. If you don't care it now, then this will become a cancer which cannot be treated at all. It needs a little bit, not $100 billion for Gulf War. It doesn't need that kind of money. The religious scholars can respond to them, and they are afraid of that. The women can respond to them, and they are afraid of that in the media. In the cohesion, as our sister mentioned, of Afghans, diaspora in India. I have larger relation. I was deputy minister for Hajj and Religious Affairs, and I also was deputy minister for education, Islamic studies. I have relations with religious community. That's something. If they don't care, they don't care. I remember when I had my discussion with a political officer of U.S. Embassy in 2001, between the 9/11 and 12 November. I told her that it's very early to go by force in arms. But she told me that it is already decided. These are something which is not recorded. But this is the reality. Who can hear it and who can judge it? That's it, thank you. I was more.
You have 5 minutes, and we can say, wow. 3 questions, and then we'll have all the panelists to respond, and then if time allows, then we will take a second round. You, please, and then human energy. Please, keep your questions brief. If you have comment, obviously you can share afterwards, but please just ask the question because there's so many people wanna.
Thank you so much, Honorable Diplomat of Afghanistan. Very, very short and brief comment on these explosions of creations of madrasas. It's concerning because it worries everybody, no doubt about it. I think it has 2 solutions because one of them is change the regime. There is an Arabic proverb. It says that the people follow the course of their leaders. As long as the Taliban is there, nothing significant can be done with madrasas. Don't worry about it.
Do you have any particular question?
Yes, and the second one is I'm agree with Mr. Tariq Osman that to generate a counter narrative. Liberal democracy in Afghanistan does not work. If you want to counter the extremism with liberal democracy, that hasn't worked. It didn't work for the last 20 years. The counter narrative should be an intellectual interpretation of religion, which worked in some neighboring countries. I don't want to go, I know I don't have time. My question is from Mr. Mehdi. Mr. Mehdi, given the oppositions, like let's say the Russian oppositions, the Chinese oppositions, the Iranian oppositions, to see the Iranian oppositions for the last 50 years, there are now over 100 groups fighting with each other for the last 50 years. Do you have any hope of the opposition just talking and talking and talking outside of Afghanistan without a genuine pressure on the Taliban military?
Thank you. Mahdi, before you answer, would like to have 2 more questions, and then the panelists will address briefly. You, ma'am, and then you, sir.
Okay. What I want to mention, it relates to what Mitra John mentioned. We have to tell our story. We have to get the society's attention to our issues. And for that, I want to get society's attention to our issues and our new generation to pay attention to those issues that has affected all of us. And I want to bring one thing that Mr. Mehdi, I admire your journalistic talent and bravery. You have always put the right people in the hot seat. You have asked the hot question. Sometimes you may have not received the answer, but we all, millions of people who saw the question, whether it was answered or not answered, we knew the truth that way. What Mitra John mentioned, that we have to tell our story, you guys, journalists, social media, or the expression that we have to communicate with the society, millions of people. If we don't tell our story, our issues will not be paid attention.
Hi, Ken Spiker, Nova Friends of Refugees. We were the One Journey Festival folks, so we've been trying to tell your story. We've applied for you all to tell your story for several years. But my question is in the general area of how can we be better allies? You know, thinking of education, we've helped working with people in Northern Virginia who operate the Rumi Legacy Schools, which are home schools for girls in Afghanistan or in Kabul, who are meeting in homes we're being supplied with laptops and education that way. Miriam Bibi started the network of schools for girls and Afghan girls in Pakistan. All these kind of things, we've been trying to support them. how can we do a better job of make all those things happen? I've got a friend that has one school in Kabul that it's for boys and girls, but they got limited when Taliban came in to 6th grade, and now they're kind of doing it on the sly and doing what they can. But we want to be more supportive and help them in a better way.
About the opposition, that's why I'm still a journalist. You know, they are not working nice. I think that's the biggest weakness of our people, that some of them are still following or running after the leaders of the republic. We need new generation. We need new ideas. We need new paths. Otherwise, you know, the old roads end in the old holes, you know. We have to accept the change. The Taliban are not the same thing that they used to be. We need new leaders, we need new ideas, and we have to unite. We have to unite. The reason the Taliban are still in power in Afghanistan, unfortunately, is because of our needs. It's because of the fact that the politicians and leaders are still fighting about, you know, their homes, houses, and fortunes in Afghanistan and Pakistan and other places. That's unfortunately the reality. The new generation needs new heroes and new leaders. As a reporter, as a journalist, I'll be more than happy to travel and go and ask questions from that leaders as well.
Thank you. Just one thing about this, how to help us. Education is obviously the first thing, but I think I have, if you probably heard my reflection, I teach in the American University of Afghanistan. This is right now literally the only global modern education institution left in the country, beyond it left. Everything is closed. And it continues to work with the dedication. You don't get pay or anything else. With the dedication of the faculty and that the people were actually both out. So if you want to look at it, and 99% of our city scholars are upon, so every morning when I work and teach, I recommend it for people from different parts of the country. A5, A6 is on the global sheep when it goes. I am representing the source, it's still there. So they find both more than anything else, so education is that one way to keep involved, so the ideas who they are and make you know. Everyone else, look, as the American University of Afghanistan, see me as a help, because we are under a lot of pressure for obvious reasons you got certainty.
I will just go to one of the problems that we have in Afghanistan. The stone will not be broken unleashed by another stone. The main point is, if you want Taliban to be defeated, you have to defeat their narrative of being religious. And that cannot be done without religious scholars' progress. And that is something which is key, because you cannot ignore religion in Afghanistan, even in the war. But in Afghanistan, it became something else. It always kind of excludes the society. For that reason, I will say, addition to all those suggestions that we had, I will suggest to strongly support the Afghan scholars, that they can do something for us and for all of us.
I didn't develop keys today without mentioning Mandani. So I can mention a matter in relation to the question about liberal democracy. I do disagree with this narrative of what or exiled community can do in comparing it with Iran. To be honest, if we can get a civil society like one in Iran in 10 years, I will be happy. They are a vibrant, educated society, and it's internally and externally. The tension, of course, exists, but how the politics work of the West and East is a separate thing. But I think the way the civil resistance of Iran has transformed them as a community, I think I do look up to them. And if we have that many educated and liberal-minded individuals in Afghanistan as a result of this diaspora community resistance in 5 years, I think it worth celebration. And that relation, I wanted to say, I don't want to excuse our faults or allow anyone to tell us that we don't deserve liberal democracy, or we should go with a policy of appeasement to the Taliban, or pretend that we are, that we are Muslims too. I do want us to prove to Taliban that we are Muslim enough. So what I'm saying is, I'm sure you are following the political trend we are seeing globally. There is rise of authoritarianism everywhere. We are seeing clash in debates against multilateralism. The work on accountability I have to deal with all those regressions globally within UN and when I engage with different states too. But then what the trend Moulaنا said, and then you're seeing with outside thing too, there is a lot of good discussions and articles out now, and I'm sure you are listening to, is how they're saying that's what Democrats try to do in the first era of Trump election and also in the second one. And that they were like, let's introduce a moderate Democrat, right, to someone that can be electable. So I think the buzzword in American politics today is electability. And what we are seeing is people are like, no, if Moulaana is good, regardless of if he is not moderate enough, or Saeed is not, moderate Democrat, but they are very left and progressive, but they are serving us, we're gonna vote for them. And I think Taliban has خسته کرده و بر گفته خود ما هم که مردم از آزادیشان سر رفته که if we as opposition give them the liberal democracy that can provide a system where human dignity is preserved, they will support us and stand behind us. And that's where Mahdisif's comment come in. We need new faces, we need new leaders who people can trust, and they will stand behind that. So I think that alignment in the US we are seeing in terms of the political trend can be true for Afghanistan too. Thank you. And then of course you are helping, that support is very important. Just expand it and continue doing that, because initially I was like, I talk with a lot of women inside Afghanistan, and even if I go to one Zoom class once a week, that helps so much with maintaining the hope. So thank you.
Thank you, Major Jan. Briefly, I wanted to say that we all have phones and social media. One way to help is to educate and share what is happening. And when you scroll, when you see photos, videos, articles, share it. And that is a beautiful way of building knowledge about what is happening, because there's no media covering Afghanistan. I'm afraid to say that we don't have time at all to go around the second round of the question, but I wanted to thank you all for participating and asking very insightful and important questions. So today's discussion leaves us with a difficult but necessary distinction, and that is Afghanistan does not suffer from lack of information. The international community knows what is happening. The question is, will the knowledge, the documentations, the reports that are now in place finally produce action, and that produces responsibility and is then accountability? That's the question I leave you all today's discussion with. I want to end the discussion with a motto and a very powerful saying of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I quote, injustice anywhere, injustice everywhere. So that is important to remember. Thank you all, the panelists, for the very insightful talks and the information you shared, and thank you all for being here and listening to us.
Global Voices, so I'm just going to share a quick message.
from one of the girls who have written to us. This is our message to the local, to the international community. Her name is Jamila. She writes, I wholeheartedly plead with the international community not to recognize the Taliban government. This is a misogynistic regime that has deprived half of society of their most basic human rights. The Taliban have stripped women of education, employment, freedom, and even the right to a dignified life. They have forced them to remain at home, subjected them to hard and exhausting labor without any choice or voice to defend themselves. Why should a woman not be free? Why should she not strive to reach her dreams? While Afghan women have always fought their way through life with courage and perseverance, their dreams have been crushed one by one under the boots of the Taliban restrictions and humiliation. Many young girls, due to immense psychological pressure and countless deprivations, have resorted to suicide. Some have become victims of forced marriage. The spirit and soul of Afghan girls have endured deep, irreparable wounds over these years. Why must all this suffering fall solely on the shoulders of Afghan girls? Is a woman not human? Are Afghan women less than men? No, women are half of society. They are not weak. A woman is a mother, a sister, the source of love, patience, and life itself. I hope for the day when no woman, simply for being a woman, is deprived of her humanity, her freedom, or her fundamental rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carpina. I will not able to read the message. Last night you were working on those messages. It was about 2,000 messages and voices from leaders in Afghanistan, but we are predicting 150 of them to be printed. But I was not able to read at least 2 of them. Rumi House has produced research papers examining the root causes of Afghanistan plus and had prepared a Farsi language magazine. I would now like to invite Mr. Varuna Gifo, a former diplomat and the current head of research of Rumi House, to give a brief discussion. You have almost 5 minutes.
So, I just want to briefly talk about our journal. I will just few minutes that is really. Just one thing about Ustad Guroi, he was worried about the second books that he talk about how to do the war. It's very easy. Just escaping from the country, don't fight. We learn from our story recently. Mr. Guroni, we work together. He just had a review on the Western writers, not all the points. So. It's my pleasure to be here with you. It's all our professors, researchers. I want to briefly talk about the WATOC, Journal of Afghanistan Studies. It should be furthered because a lot of our audience are authors, is fellow speakers. And I hope in coming future we will have it in Farsi and Uzbek and other Afghanistan and national languages. And then Rumi House, we realized there is a gap. That there is a lot of literature in English and other languages, but there is not in our own language, especially Persian, and amongst our diaspora, academic research that can find the cause and the result of problems and challenges in Afghanistan. That's why, to respond this need, we established the WATOC. WATOC is a Sanskrit language. It means research, tahqiq, mudada'a wa research. Even in Pashto languages, I can our parents ask me is kind of sound of Pashto also. It's also Pashto. I think we sound it's present. We can use it in both languages. Our main goals to publish this journal of Fasilname Mutalaat Afghanistan to provide a platform for academic dialogue, critical analysis, and diverse scholarly perspective, and to connect Afghanistan's diaspora, writers and scholars together. That's very main goals. Our first issue is about the clock of Afghanistan, unfortunately, 2021. In this issue, that I hope it will just in 2, 3, 4 days we will publish it. There is a lot of articles about the craft of Afghanistan, the result, and the causes. وضعات یا فصلنامه مطالعات افغانستان عدد تصویرش نیست یک بستری باشه برای تحقیق و ریسرچ و اقتصادی. همه وطنان ما که در بخش تحقیق و ریسرچ و کارهای اکادمی فعال هستند. اولین شماره ما در باره سقوط است. دلایل سقوط، همکارا و دوستای خوب ما همکاری کردن، مقالات را فرستادیم که از اون میان ما اقتباسش انتخاب کردیم در رابطه به سقوط و یک 5 مقاله داریم و یک قانون بررسی ادبیات که در رابطه با سقوط است که آقای گروانی در باردش صحبت تا 16 در کتاب البته بیکابای کاملیگیش خاطر در میان شدن. از مقاله اولی در رابطه با عوامل بیرونی فروپاشی جمهوری در افغانستان است که 2 تا از ریسرچرهای با او را نوشتند. ریسرچرهای مکتب روابط بین‌الملل کابل هستند، آقای محمد مصطفی عاقلی و ابراهیم مایل اگراییوی. مقاله دوم جنگی که در 2 سال باخته شد، تبیین جامعه شناختی سقوط است که آقای گرانی بسیار خوب است از بود جامعه شناختی شیره بررسی کرده و در نظرم کیویی عصبیت نفردون که چگونه ما منبر مسجد واقعی چگونه در قریه‌ها جنگ واقعی چگونه بی‌توجه شدید در اصل موضوع و عامل اصلی شکست در او بررسی کردن. مقاله سوم آقای دکتر صاحب بلخی است که میلیون‌های گسسته عوامل ناقانونی دولت ملت‌سازی در افغانستان بررسی کرده و مقاله چهارمی ما فروپاشی جمهوری افغانستان عوامل ساختاری سیاسی امنیتی است از آقای محمد داوود فهیمی که از همکارای خوب ما و ریسرچرهای ما در کابل هستند و مقاله آخری هم که فروپاشی دولت در افغانستان تکرار تاریخ است، اصلا به زبان انگلیسی بود که آقای نصیر اندیشه نوشته کرده که روان نشر شده اون فارسیش برگردان کرد. وقت بسیار کم از وقت نمیگیرم. از همه شما عزیزان و سروران گرامی هم سپاسگزاری میکنیم، هم دعوت به همکاری میکنیم. منتظر هستیم که مقالات و نوشته و پیپر و آرتیکل هرچی به انگلیسی و فارسی دارین و ما بفرستید که در آینده نزدیک یک بدانیم یک ژورنال واقعا علمی اکادمی که داشته باشیم و حتی در 3 زبان ملی ما، فارسی، پشتو و ازبکی. صادق تشکر از شما.
Thank you very much, Varun. I'm sorry about the time that you are missing. As today's conference comes to a close, we extend our sincere gratitude to our dear finalists for the resource artists and attendees for your presence and very focused devotion. Today's discussion reminded us of an essential truth. Although 5 years of Taliban rules have brought profound, tortured, and systematic oppression, Afghanistan's story is not defined only by suffering. It's also a story of remarkable resilience, civil courage, and enduring pursuit of freedom, justice, diversity, inclusion, and dignity. Let us carry to this insights, stories, and sense of urgency into our research, policy making, and global advocacy. The silence must end. Our commitment to the people of Afghanistan must remain true. Thank you to Rumi House, American University, Alpine, and University Caribbean, ACPIS for hosting today's event. God bless you all, and stay safe. Art has always been a powerful vessel for memory, resistance, and truth-telling, where speech is suppressed. A special thanks to Mr. Kunesh Shariki, co-founder and president of Art Lords, for his kind and prompt response to writing our event with his heart. Alongside to this academic discussion, we are proud to feature a special art exhibit showcasing work that capture the grief, strength, and unbroken spirit of Afghanistan. We invite all you to take this time to explore the exhibition in Jake, Gizzard, artist, and Tonic Zuparida. Thank you so much.